Welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. Before I start, I'd like to wish everyone a happy Valentine's Day, and if I just got some men in trouble, I am very sorry. We're going to go into In the News right now, and let me give you a little bit of what's been happening. A lot's happening, but as we go into the news, I want you to really see this one. Crime scene, do not cross. This article came out this week. America's epic crime wave shows no sign of slowing down. All over the nation, law enforcement is losing control, and violent criminals are getting the upper hand. I'm sure you've seen some of the news, what's happened in New York and other places. Even our capital city, crime is completely and utterly out of control. Carjackings in Washington, D.C. were up 97.9% last year. Washington, D.C. residents, car insurance premiums, if you live there, 37% higher than the national average. In Oakland, 1 out of every 30 residents had a vehicle stolen from them in 2023. In Seattle, one restaurant has actually been broken into 5 times in the last 3 months. There's no way that I would open up a small business in Seattle or Portland or Oregon or Oakland or San Francisco. In New York City, police officers are getting beaten at a record-setting pace. The number of cops hurt by suspects as 4,724 uniformed officers suffered injuries in attacks in 2022. This year so far, in 2023, it's 5,436. You only hear about a couple of them that hit the news, but this is an everyday occurrence many times, multiple times a day. So at this stage in our societal collapse, the criminals are not even afraid to attack cops. Can you imagine? The Biden administration has made the national crime wave significantly worse by allowing millions upon millions of migrants. I think the total is somewhere about 10 million and counting right now. It's come pouring over our southern border. So, needless to say, our wide open borders have also made it easy for cartels to transport drugs all over our country. Cartels have been particularly focusing on Indian reservations throughout Montana. One state lawmaker says that it seems like fentanyl is raining down on the reservation. There is nowhere that you can go in the U.S. to completely escape all of this. From coast to coast, our society is literally coming apart at the seams. If things are this bad now, what will our society look like once millions upon millions of people in this country become extremely desperate? We are really right on the brink of an extremely apocalyptic chapter in human history. And again, I don't want to be a harbinger of bad news. If you stay with us till the end of the study and through the Genesis study, you'll see that I'm not, and that basically we can give you a hope. But most people don't want to think about such things. Americans like to put things off until they happen. Most people just want to stick their heads in the sand and pretend that everything is okay. And that's one of the reasons why I bring you in the news. I know it's not pleasant, but I want us to be understanding and understand what's going on. It can be so easy to ignore what's really going on in the world and tune into an alternate reality that television creates for us. Did you know that a 30-second commercial during this year's Super Bowl cost $7 million? After sitting in front of the television for a few hours, you may be tempted to buy into the fictional reality that they're trying to sell you. But the truth is that life in America is not as good as it used to be, and it's not good right now. And the crime in our streets is only going to intensify during the months and years ahead. Let's go a little bit further and tell you a little bit about politics. If you know what that chart is, that is President Biden's garage. And that circle is showing the classified documents that were found there and other places. So the special counsel finds Biden willfully disclosed classified documents, but no criminal charges are warranted. That to me is an oxymoron, but let's go a little bit further. The Hur report contains significant criticism of Biden and his handling of classified information. His quote, "Our investigation uncovered evidence that President Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency and during his Senate run, when he was a private citizen also," the report said. The special counsel's 345-page report offers a detailed picture of Mr. Biden's final days as vice president and the years that followed. Classified documents that should have been sent to the National Archives or the Records Administration instead ended up in various locations, not just one, including his homes, plural, and offices, plural. Investigators conducted 173 interviews of 147 witnesses, including the president himself, which I'm sure you heard about that interview. They collected over 7 million documents from both classified and unclassified sources. 7 million. I'm sure you didn't hear that on the news. Implicating sensitive intelligence sources and methods. He had a ghostwriter for a book he wanted to write, and he gave him all classified documents, top secret documents. Special counsel said Mr. Biden's conduct presented serious risks to to national security. This is a high offense. This is a misdemeanor and a high offense. Mr. Biden shared information, including classified information, from notebooks that he had to his ghostwriter. Hearst's team determined it would not be able to prove willful retention beyond a reasonable doubt, but they said they're pretty sure it happened. I'm not sure if that's double talk or what. Prosecutors said it was possible that Mr. Biden would present himself to a jury, as he did during the interview of him, as a sympathetic, well-meaning, elderly man with a poor memory. Please let that sink in. The special counsel wrote that the president was confused about the timeline of events and was unable to ascertain questions about his time as vice president, as well as when his son died. The year he couldn't remember. Mr. Biden said he was unaware the boxes of documents had been taken to the garage in his home. That's scary. Listen, this thing goes on. It's really horrific. I won't read you all of it. Still, the special counsel seemed to take issue with Mr. Biden's continued retention of various documents after he discovered them in his possession. Investigators said they found in a basement cabinet a 3-page PowerPoint presentation regarding Afghanistan that bore classified markings and a 3-page memo labeled Top Secret that was related to Iraq. FBI searched over 300 boxes of material from Biden's time as a U.S. Senator that were stored in the University of Delaware. Within those boxes, agents found documents with potentially classified markings, Top Secret, dating from 1977 to 1991, during Mr. Biden's service in the Senate. And that's a crime. It's a felony. So, in my opinion, there's a couple things that need to be done here. Either you charge him with a crime, or basically you enact the 25th Amendment and get him out of office. This is a president that's leading our country, and I don't have to tell you this, that is incapable mentally to do it. He said this: every president before me has done the same exact thing. The problem with that is, we're not talking about him doing it when he was president. We're talking about him doing it when he was vice president and a senator. And so Hearst found that there is evidence Mr. Biden knew the notebooks were classified, but kept them anyway and shared them. And we have no idea who he shared them with. And I have to think about Hunter having access to that and getting monies from foreign nations. Was he sharing top secret documents? This is a national security problem. Guilty but incompetent is what they said. So either charge him or invoke the 25th Amendment to remove him from office. Come on. He gets away with everything. We see the two-tiered system of justice in America. Let's continue to talk about his administration, which is really pathetic. Blinken's foolishness on display. Speaking at a press conference in Israel in the midst of another whirlwind Middle East trip to seek a resolution to free the 136 hostages held by captivity by Hamas, Israel's war on Hamas, and presumably reducing the immediate threat from Hezbollah in Lebanon and Iran in general, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken made a series of remarks that were actually foolish and not conducive to a resolution of any of them. What they're doing is they're talking from both sides of their mouth. Blinken devolved into what has been referred to as a harsh rebuke of Israel's conduct of the war and put his foolishness on center stage. He said, but that cannot be a license to dehumanize others. He is suggesting that Israel is dehumanizing the civilians in Hamas. Listen, the idea of dehumanizing others is one that is deliberate, premeditated, and it's evil that he said it. It flies in the face of the biblical notion that we're all created in God's image. We have seen the humanization of others many times throughout history, but Israel's war against Hamas is not one of them. Blinken knows that. The world should know that too. It's been well documented that, in fact, Israel's gone over and above to prevent civilian casualties, delaying ground operations, creating corridors for civilians to flee where there is about to be a fierce fighting. Israel's dropped millions of flyers and has sent SMS messages and phone calls to every single Gazan who had a phone, urging them to flee. Israel sent in-ground troops, putting their lives at risk rather than simply carpet bombing Gaza, which they could have done. Israel has allowed humanitarian aid into Gaza, something unprecedented in war, to provide fuel, food, and resources, knowing that one's enemy will not only benefit but steal from these civilians and more. Can you imagine Russia sending aid into the Ukraine? This is unheard of, but Israel does it. If anything, this demonstrates a superhuman effort to preserve human life, not what Blinken and Biden are suggesting. The daily toll that Israel's military operations continue to take on innocent civilians remains too high, Blinken said. That's foolishness, because what he's doing is he's quoting Hamas casualties of 27,000, and we know Hamas is lying. Blinken acknowledged that more assistance than ever is flowing into more places in Gaza than at any time before October 7th. but treacherously added that Israel must ensure that the delivery of life-saving assistance to Gaza is not blocked for any reason by anyone. That's a ridiculous remark. Israel's doing this to the only nation that's sending aid to people they're fighting. It's absolutely ridiculous saying it. Blinken's harsh and foolish rhetoric actually became offensive and dangerous. Blinken called for a concrete time-bound and irreversible path to a Palestinian state alongside Israel, both living in peace and security. I think he's seeing little fairies because Palestinians don't want a separate state. They want to destroy Israel. He was foolish to say declaratively that most Palestinian Arabs in Gaza had nothing to do with October 7th. That's absolutely a lie, and he knows it. Because we know Arab polls show that Palestinian Arabs overwhelmingly support Hamas, almost 96%, much less that they have been willing enablers of its reign of terror. Blinken knows that when looking at the vast physical terrorist structure and infrastructure Hamas has built through Gaza alone, there is no human way to imagine it was done without the full awareness and complicity of countless Gazans. Maybe, in fact, most of them. So, Israel's at war to crush Hamas and its ideology, which has hijacked Palestinian Arab society, and every effort must be made to win. Biden's caught. His administration is caught. They don't know what to do. The ultimate left in his administration is going against him with his support for Israel. And basically, he is caught. He's losing supporters. And that's why he's talking with both sides of his mouth, as well as Blinken. Let's go a little bit further and give you a little bit more about the economy. And again, we've been telling you this for months and months and months. And the new report came out. I don't know if you saw it, but inflation is much higher than they thought it would be. I think it's 17.8% in Biden's administration, with 33% inflation in buying a car. I think it's 31% in eggs. It tells you one after another. Not good news for the Biden administration. So will emergency scenarios, and I want you to just think about this, I'm not talking about conspiracy theories, just think about it. Will emergency scenarios usher in digital currency upon America? By the way, digital currency is the worst thing that could happen to your security and to mine. The director of the FBI recently went before Congress to warn that Chinese computer hijackers are preparing to soon, quote, wreak havoc and cause real-world damage to our water treatment plants, electric grid, and gas pipelines. So, our Border Patrol reports over 5,000 encounters with Chinese nationals per month. Most of these encounters are with single military-aged men, and yet southern border has remained wide open. Biden is allowing them to come in, and these are single Chinese nationals of fighting age. You got to understand that this is not a good thing. It's 5,000 a month just from China. If you really care about the Chinese military directing cyber attacks against our infrastructure, then when you work hard to prevent thousands of potential Chinese military agents from coming over in the United States border without any type of vetting or any type of tracking. So what is really motivating the Biden administration to invite potential Chinese terrorists into the country, quote, to wreak havoc and to cause real-world damage to our nation's infrastructure? That's the real question. We have to ask, why is he allowing this? He could stop it at any time. He doesn't need Congress. He could stop it. He stopped everything that Trump was doing with executive orders on day one. He could reverse those executive orders and stop the bleeding at the border. So why doesn't he? That's the real question. To understand it, we must step back and take in a bigger picture of world events. The World Economic Forum, WEF, is an international organization whose leadership includes royalty like the Queen of Jordan and King Charles. It also includes financial leaders like the CEO of BlackRock. And boy, if you ever do any research BlackRock. Their investments and their net worth is more than every single country in the world except the United States and China. It's huge, it's gigantic, and it's controlling a lot of the finances and a lot of other things. Also, the president of the World Bank is part of it, and the head of the Chinese stock market exchange. And its participants include everyone from, this is talking about the World Economic Forum, everyone from Amazon to NBC to Zoom. The founder of the WF takes great pride in having groomed many national leaders like Justin Trudeau of Canada and, are you ready for it? Gavin Newsom of California. In November 2020, the WF and Carnegie Endowment for International Peace co-produced a report that warned that the global financial system was increasingly vulnerable to cyber attacks. The same report called for the merging of Wall Street banks, and it also said this: there are regulators and intelligence agencies like the CIA as necessary to confront an allegedly imminent cyber attack that will collapse the existing financial system. They're setting us up. That cyber attack is going to come. It's not going to come from China. It's going to be an orchestrated cyber attack. Let me give you an understanding why. The World Economic Forum has conducted a simulation of a cyber attack that brings the global financial system to its knees, and that's what they want. The WF has also advocated a central bank digital currency. Here it is, or a CBDC, eerily similar to the biblical mark of the beast system. China already has a CBDC that is tied to a person's social credit score. I've told you about this months ago, where a person can have his money turned off or on according to that person's score. So if you wanted to restrict people to traveling only 5 miles from their home, then you could program CBDCs to turn off when people tried to purchase anything 6 miles from home. CBDC technology allows for endless forms of social control. Since we know that the WF wants every nation to adopt a CBDC, it does not seem far-fetched to hypothesize that the WF officials have a strong incentive to actually want cyber attacks to happen globally, a crisis. What evidence can we see that this is about to happen? Well, the president of the Ukraine recently signed a CBDC into law for his country. Many other nations are making progress towards CBDC implementation. Excuse me, and that includes the United States. President Biden recently signed an executive order to speed up U.S. development of a CBDC. Listen, I'm telling you, this could easily become the mark of the beast. You may have not known that, an executive order that will put the U.S. government in control of all your buying and all of your selling. And that's not conspiracy theory. This is fact I'm giving you. Americans are asleep at the wheel when it comes to Joe Biden and the things that he's doing. Therefore, some type of emergency must be created in order to stampede Americans into docile acceptance of CBDC. Usher in new lockdowns, spread a lethal Ebola variant, foment a civil war, create a global oil crisis with a hot war in the Persian Gulf, are elements within our intelligence agency working on behalf of the world's largest banks in the WEF, helping China engineer a series of cyber attacks in the United States in order to create havoc, in order to implement a new financial system. 10 years ago, I would have said that's ridiculous. Today, watching how America's going, I think it's very viable. It would not be the first time our government took the extreme measures in order to implement a new financial system. On April 5th, 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt issued an executive order that required Americans to turn in their gold coins, bullion, and gold certificates to a Federal Reserve Bank under penalty of imprisonment and $10,000 fine. 1933, it's a lot of money. At that time, gold was money in the form of gold coins or as banknotes that could be exchanged for gold. They had blue seals on top of the banknotes. Almost all the banks were then forced to be closed by the government, and only a few large banks were allowed to reopen. Suddenly, no one had any money. The Federal Reserve gathered all the gold and then hoarded it itself. You may have heard of the place, Fort Knox, and still kept the new unbacked by gold paper money supply tight for another 3 years. No one had any money. Even wealthy families did not have any money. People with children in private schools found that they had to take their kids out of school in order to put food on the table. This time, it will be different, where once gold backed up our financial system and most people were debt-free, today securities like stocks, bonds, house mortgages are the underlying collateral of the current financial system, and the majority of us in America are in debt. So think about the part of the new financial reset that transfers everyone over to a CBD system. When you place your funds in a bank, the bank becomes the owner of your deposits. That means that when a bank fails, your bank deposits are used to pay the bank's creditors first. Not you, their creditors. FDIC insurance is supposed to cover that gap, but provides protection only if a few banks fail at a time. If even 5% of banks failed at the same time, the FDIC that insures your money in the bank would not have enough funds to cover the losses. It's worse with stocks and bonds, whether you're in a retirement fund or bought through a broker directly. We saw that in 2008 when the brokerage firm Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. When Lehman customers first heard that Lehman had failed, they sought to transfer the deposits to another brokerage company. But the law had changed, and these assets were used to satisfy Lehman's largest creditor in bankruptcy, J.P. Morgan. The depositors were furious and they went to court, but the judge ruled that they were unsecured creditors, while JP Morgan was both primary secured creditor and had protected class status because it was too big to fail. So, a cyber attack disabling the electrical grid and financial system could certainly take down the entire financial system with it. A U.S. civil war could set it off, as could another 9/11 attack, a major oil embargo, or a more lethal form of Chinese COVID. The resulting chaos would provide the excuse to reset. Remember that word? Reset the financial system and usher in CBDCs. People will be distracted by the chaos and fail to recognize that the chaos was in fact manufactured. It's called a black flag. It is all like a game of Monopoly. We are at the end of the game, and all the pieces, including your pension and house and savings, will get pulled back into the bank. The bank then restarts the game, except this time, CBDCs will be the money. They'll be very, very hard to refuse. People will be desperate, frightened, they'll be hungry. People will literally need the CBDCs to eat. CBDC will come to the rescue. You can download an app on your phone so that you can download some CBDC currency to buy milk, except it will not be real money. You'll be borrowing money from the largest banks that issue CBDCs. Now they have you. If we do nothing, then the WF motto that you will own nothing, that's their motto, by 2030 will come true. That's pretty scary stuff, but it's definitely biblical because that will be, CBDCs will be a part of implemented with the mark of the beast. Let's go a little further now that I have your attention. Europe pushed to stand alone. Western Europe and America have been allies in two world wars, the Persian Gulf crisis and many other conflicts. However, the winds of change are blowing, and the possibility of a second Trump presidency has European leaders facing a new reality. They are scared that Europe's future defense may be up to Europeans alone because Trump is definitely for America first. The United States has been Europe's security blanket since at least World War II. American nuclear weapons, tanks, aircraft, over 100,000 American troops on European soil have given comfort to many European leaders. But with America's waning support and a larger war looming in Europe, EU leaders are pushing to rapidly rearm and increase their own nuclear capabilities. German European People's Party leader Manfred Weber warned, quote, "Europe must build deterrence. We must be able to deter and defend ourselves. We all know that when push comes to shove, the nuclear option is really a decisive one we must use." Nuclear war? Germany's military has sketched out an exercise scenario for its planners to contemplate. It envisions a Russian attack into the Suwalki Gap between Poland and Lithuania in the period between this year's U.S. presidential election and early 2025. The German defense minister recently warned that German experts expect Russia could attack a NATO member in the next 5 to 8 years. Another observer noted, as the history of the 20th century has shown, European democracies may be slow to turn a war footing, but once they do, they'll be difficult to match. Will nuclear war come to Europe? Bible prophecy indicates a powerful European configuration of nations at the end of the age. External threats and fading support from America may provide and produce and make Europe act. You know, when I was a kid in the 1960s, I had to duck and roll under my desk at school because we were fearful of a nuclear attack from Russia. And now we're seeing, and basically there was arms controls that worked for decades. And now we're starting to talk nuclear again. It's a real scary scenario. Let's go a little bit further and give you this one. Prophecy in the spotlight. Approaching hoofbeats. The sign of the times rapidly accelerates. Some of the signs that the 4 decades ago seemed so indicative of nearing rapture pale in comparison to everything that we see today. The Antichrist rides. It's only been in the past 6 years or so that Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, I've been telling you about it, have come out of the shadows and revealed their true intentions to the world. They have invited the news media into their once secret meetings, and so have the Bilderbergs, and revealed their true intention to enslave the world under, quote, "Build Back Better," which is a euphemism for their intent to create a Marxist, totalitarian world government. The threat of nuclear war. In Approaching Hoofbeats, by the way, that was written by evangelist Billy Graham in 1983. He wrote about the threat of a devastating nuclear war in 1983, which was a major concern at the time. Today, however, this danger has reached the point where most analysts believe it's likely to occur in the next few years. A group called the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists made headlines on January 23rd of this year by resetting their doomsday clock, I've shown that several times, back to 90 seconds before midnight, the closest, midnight being doomsday. This is a quote from their latest press release under the section titled "The Many Dimensions of Nuclear Threat." Quote, "A durable end to Russia's war in Ukraine seems distant, and the use of nuclear weapons by Russia in that conflict remains a serious possibility. In February 2023, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the decision to suspend the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. In March, he announced the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. In June, Sergei Karaganov, an advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin, urged Moscow to consider launching limited nuclear strikes on Western Europe as a way to bring the war in Ukraine to a favorable conclusion. Today's world is exceedingly more dangerous than it was in 1983. The prospect of a nuclear war was a possibility back then. Now it's become a matter of when rather than if. Economic peril. This year, our national debt rose to $34.1 trillion. Do you ever wonder why people are buying gold now more than ever? I did a little research and I found a chart. This is the black is the national debt. Look at it from 1970, zero national debt, couple hundred thousand, to $34 trillion. The squiggly line is the purchase of gold during this time. People are scared. People want to buy gold to ensure that they have something of value once our dollar continues to. You can't print money forever. This is just since 1970. $34.7 trillion in debt. The current number is not only unsustainable for the future, but it also tells us that the current debt level in America will surely bring economic collapse and catastrophe. It tells us that the black horse of Revelation will soon ride across America and the rest of the world. The Lord's restraining hand is the only reason the world has not yet experienced the worst inflation in history. And you know, as I'm speaking this to you and as I'm telling you in the news, I'm getting a check. The check is, man, this is tough stuff. This is hard to hear. You know the check I'm getting? I feel like getting a check from the Holy Spirit. You better warn. You better tell people. Stop hiding your head in the sand. This is close. Now, let me give you the good news. Well, before I do that, let me tell you about the pale horse. Revelation 6, 7, 8 says that over a fourth of the earth will perish as a result of Jesus opening the seals. The total death toll that resulted from World War II, which some place as high as 75 million people, is absolutely horrific. Of course, but it pales in comparison to what lies ahead. The time is rapidly approaching when the world will see the fulfillment of all that John both witnessed and wrote about in Revelation 6, 1 to 8. The Bible says that sudden destruction will overwhelm the world after the rapture. 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 to 11. Though dreadful for those who hear the hoofbeats in the future, the nearing of this time tells us that Jesus' appearing is ever so close. We will be in heaven before Jesus opens the seals described in Revelation chapter 6. So in the midst of me giving you the tough news, I want you to understand that there is an answer for us. Let me give you one more, actually two more. Let me give you this one. This is under wokeism, moral decay. Turning tide. The New York Times offers detransitioners' testimony. So the New York Times is starting to change its mind. One of the mainstream media flagship publications appears to be reversing course on gender transition for children and family. Listen to the warnings issued by detransitionalists. The New York Times published an article last week featuring interviews with detransitioners, ones that want to go back, psychologists and medical experts, urging against what has often been called gender-affirming care for children. The article begins with a story of a young girl named Grace Powell, who began the gender transition process at 17, including receiving hormone drugs and a double mastectomy. At no point during her medical or surgical transition did anyone ask her about the reasons behind her gender dysphoria or her depression, the article notes. At no point was she asked about her sexual orientation. At no point was she asked about the previous trauma. And so neither the therapist nor the doctors ever learned that she'd been sexually abused as a child. Transitioning seemed like the obvious solution. The article says that Powell's mostly online exploration of transgenderism. The narrative she had heard and absorbed was that if you don't transition, you will kill yourself. This ultimatum has become a standard of the gender transition industry, even according to the New York Times. The incidence of suicidal thoughts and attempts among gender dysphoric youth is complicated by the higher incidence of autism, the autism spectrum disorder. The article notes that children who identify as transgender are often very autistic. Sometimes that's diagnosed, sometimes it's not. But it's almost never taken into account when hormone drugs and surgeries are offered. Dr. Hakim explained, the thing about the autistic mind is it's very black and white. It loves categories, it loves rules. Thus, when an autistic young man feels as though he doesn't fit into the category of a male, he wants to know where he does fit in. Other conditions which gender-affirming care refuses to address includes chronic depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, attention deficit, hyperactive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and many others, any of which may lead to suicidal thoughts. Many parents of kids who consider themselves trans say their children were introduced to transgender influences on YouTube or TikTok, a phenomenon intensified for some by the isolation and online cocoon of COVID. Others say their kids learn these ideas in the classroom as early as elementary school, often in child-friendly ways through curriculum supplied by trans rights organizations, with concepts like gender unicorn or the genderbread person. Many medical and mental health professionals reportedly want to explore other options and treatments before rushing to hormone drugs and genital surgeries, but feel their hands have been tied by activist pressure and organizational capture. As noted in the New York Times article, numerous healthcare professionals have reported harassment and persecution for simply referring children for further mental health care rather than prescribe their hormone drugs. A biological woman, now calling herself Erin Kimbley, was forced to resign from her job at a health clinic when she refused to prescribe children hormone drugs and puberty blockers within the first few sessions, referring them instead to mental health experts for further assessment. When therapist Stephanie Wynn urged colleagues to consider the testimony of detransitioners, she was labeled transphobic and fired from her job. Gender dysphoria seems like it is, much of the time, a symptom of something else in someone's life. Most advanced medical communities in Europe have begun warning against gender transition procedures for minors, citing a lack of evidence that such procedures are beneficial and even cautioning that they may be damaging. One factor not addressed by the New York Times is the lasting damage done by gender transition procedures. In the documentary The Lost Boys, young men who had actually gone through the gender transition process recounted the horrors of gender-affirming surgeries. Referring to his own experiences, one of the detransitioners interviewed lamented, quote, "Some people are now messed up for life. I'll never be able to have kids. My rugged masculinity is never going to come back." Other detransitioners like Chloe Clow have also spoken of the lasting irreparable damage done by gender transition surgeries. So a lot of heavy duty in the news. Let me give you something light as we close in the news. You can take a look at that chart. Last week in our Genesis study, I showed you some of the examples of God's amazing creative genius in the diversity of the animal world. This week, this photo story was published. Let me just tell you what this is. This is a venomous but adorable. Memphis Zoo celebrates the birth of a rare pygmy slow loris. The dedicated staff at the zoo have taken on the responsibility of hand-rearing the baby pygmy slow loris, ensuring it receives round-the-clock care. Initially, the primate was nourished with formula every 2 hours. As it continues to grow, the little one has now graduated to a slurry of banana, leaf eater biscuit, water, and formula, which it eagerly consumes from a bowl. The pygmy slow loris, scientifically known as Nycticebus pygmaeus, is native to the forest regions of southern Asia. Despite their endearing appearance, pygmy slow loris are not suitable as pets. They have a special dietary needs, are easily stressed, and watch this, possess a unique method of protecting themselves when they're young because they're so small. The species coats their babies in a mixture of saliva and secretions to create a venom, a deadly venom, highlighting the complexity of their need for survival. Wow, God's creative genius, so tiny yet so deadly. That's in the news for tonight. Don't be